video, we're going to be looking at the first part of the muscle. So when we look at muscular system, something to keep in mind is all the skeletal muscles are an organ within the skeletal muscle system. And so far there have been 5. Now, when we look at muscles, muscles can only pull, and that's because of the way the sarcomere is set up. When the muscle contracts, the Z lines come closer and closer until they come in contact. So we can only make the muscle shorter, thus creating a pulling motion. So they're never going to push. This is one of the reasons why we have to have so many muscles, is because we're going to have somebody to pull us out of anatomical position and then somebody to pull us back into anatomical position. Now, muscles, just like people, like to work in groups. That way they can harness greater strength and they can do more work and have more capacity. And as a muscle shortens, remember, the insertion moves towards the origin. So when we look at the factors that determine the effects of muscle contraction, there's several things that go into that. One is the arrangement of the fascicles or the fibers. So they can only pull in the direction in which they are laying. And of course, the way the muscle attaches to the bone. If we have a lot of attachments or thick attachments, then we're going to be able to generate a bigger pull than if we have small attachments or fewer attachments. Now, there are different ways we classify muscles. We can classify them based on the shape. So when we look at the fascicles, and remember, within a fascicle, all the muscle fibers are parallel. So how are those fascicles connecting? We can look at the action or the movement of the muscle, and we can look at the size and range of motion. So shapes of muscles. First, we have parallel muscles. With parallel muscles, the fascicles are going to run the parallel to the axis of the muscle. So these come in two basic forms. We have spindle-shaped muscles, where they're going to have the ends taper to points, or the strap-like muscle, where the ends are the same width as the middles. Now, some books will separate these into two categories. Others will keep them together, like we have in our notes. Now, when we look at parallel muscles, in the middle, we're going to have a central body, also known as a gaster or a belly. And as this muscle contracts, the muscle will get shorter, but the belly will get larger in diameter. And examples we have the biceps brachii. Again, it's going to be one of those fusiform shaped muscles. And then the sartorius muscle. So So here's that biceps brachii. As it contracts, the gaster is going to get larger. Pinnate muscles. Pinnate is a term that means feather-like. So they're going to have short fascicles that are going to insert into a tendon at an oblique angle, looking kind of like a bird's feather. Now, these guys, because of that oblique angle, they can generate a lot more tension than our parallel muscles. And we have 3 types. Our first type are unipinnate. The fascicles with unipinnate only insert on one side of the tendon, so you can kind of think of half a feather. An example of this in the body would be the extensor digitorum, the muscle that extends the fingers. Bipinnate, that means the muscle attaches to both sides. So an example would be the rectus femoris, that is going to extend our knee. And multipinnate, we still have the muscles inserting on both sides of the tendon, but now that tendon has a branch to it. So you'll have branches that will give us a little bit more directionality. Example, the deltoid. That deltoid muscle looks like a triangle because we have 3 tendon branches in there. All of them going to have fascicles inserting on both sides. So here's that unipinnate. Everybody is on one side of the tendon. Our bipinnate, the tendon would be in the middle. And then our multipinnate, so we have those tendons, and each of them are going to have those little oblique muscle attachment points. A convergent muscle will converge to a central point, and that is where we're going to direct all the forces of the muscle pool. They tend to be fan-shaped because they are going to be going towards a point, and that point is known as a raphe. It may be a tendon, it may be an aponeurosis, so a muscle to bone or a muscle to muscle, or they may just be little tiny collagen fibers if the muscle is very small. Now, these guys can pull in lots of directions because of how we look at the engagement of the fascicles. If we engage the top fascicle, the tendon moves up. If we engage the bottom fascicles, that tendon is going to move down. Or if we engage the middle or everybody, the tendon is going to move to the side. So an example of a convergent muscle would be the pectoralis major. A sphincter muscle or circular muscle, the contraction will close a hole. So you're going to have fascicles that are arranged in a circular pattern that are attached with little bitty aponeuroses or just collagen fibers. And when they contract, they pull on each other, closing that opening.
So sphincter muscle doesn't only mean like for the rectum. There's a sphincter muscle around your eye, and there's also a sphincter muscle around your mouth. So that sphincter muscle opens and closes your mouth, and the sphincter muscle also opens and closes your eye. The eye muscle, the sphincter muscle around your eye is called the orbicularis oculi, and the one around your mouth is called the orbicularis oris. Now, don't ask me what the sphincter muscle around your bunghole is. I have no idea. Anyways, back to this.
Examples of that would be the orbicularis oris, so you can make kissing faces, or the orbicularis oculi, so you can wink at people. And this again just shows you our groups. We have our parallel muscle, the orbicularis oris, with little bitty aponeuroses or just collagen fibers. And when they contract, they pull on each other, closing that opening. So examples of that would be the orbicularis oris, so you can make kissing faces, or the orbicularis oculi, so you can wink at people. And this again just shows you our groups. We have our parallel muscles where they're the same width, the entire length, or fusiform shape. Convergence going to that raphe. The unipinnate on one side, bipinnate both sides, multipinnate
muscle around the
both
eye.
sides, but branch tendons, and then our circular smooth muscle. And the action of a muscle, again, as a muscle shortens, the insertion will move towards the origin. Again, the origin is the part that does not move, and the insertion is the point that does. Now, you can determine which end is which by looking at several things. One, you can look at how is it attached to the bone. Typically, you're going to have more attachment points, more heads at the origin than at the insertion, or the origin will be larger than the insertion.
Physical therapy, but I'm pretty sure physical therapy is the same as sports medicine, just about.
Or you can just look at how the muscle moves. If the muscle is moving the radius, then the insertion is probably on the radius. Now, depending on who you have, sometimes the origin insertion is not as important to the actual attachment point, so you can predict the movements. And other times, that is how that muscle is going to get its name. So it's very important that you know which end from which. Now, movement, we can name it based on the bones that are involved. Flexion of the forearm, so that means the radius and the ulna are getting closer to the humerus. Or we can name it based on the joint, the flexion of the elbow. So that is, again, that elbow joint between the ulna and the humerus. Oftentimes, these are used interchangeably, but depending on your career, if you're a physical therapist, you may talk about the action of the joint more than anything. If you are an orthopedic surgeon, you might talk about the bones or the parts of the body. And sometimes you have to be able to deal with both if you are a nurse who works with both categories or both professions.
So the origin stays. The origin is where the muscle originates from, and it's also where it stays. Trying to get a good view on this. Which one moves? You see, you got the origin and the insertion. The insertion is the point that moves. The origin is like the beginning of it, like, you know, the origins of Batman. He was and always is whenever he first started out, you know what I mean?
functional group based on science or range of motion. So we have these terms. We have the agonist. That is the prime mover. That is the main guy that's going to do the movement. Kind of like Batman is your main hero in Gotham City. Examples in the body, the prime mover of the elbow is the biceps brachii. So the origin is on the humerus, the insertion is on the radius, and when the biceps brachii contracts, the radius or the forearm moves closer to the humerus. The antagonist, that is the opposition or the opposite movement. So that would be like the Joker. He is always the bad guy, always the opposite of Batman. Typically in the body, they're on the opposite side of the joint from the agonist. So, for example, during forearm flexion, the biceps brachii is the agonist, while the triceps brachii is the antagonist. And then we have synergists. Synergists are going to help us out, kind of like Robin. He's there to help out Batman, but he's not necessary. He's not in all the movies. So they are going to do different things. One, they can add extra force to a movement. So when you need to take an extra deep breath, maybe you don't need to use just the diaphragm, the agonist of breathing. Maybe you need to expand the ribs, the external intercostals to help take in a deep breath. Reduce undesirable or unnecessary movements. The bone that a muscle inserts on doesn't guarantee that that bone doesn't have anybody else having its origin or insertion on it. So sometimes we need it to make sure that the movement doesn't happen or get interfered with the other muscle groups or have too much movement. So example, the brachioradialis during forearm flexion is going to make sure that the forearm is not pronating and supinating during flexion. And then of course fixators. These are a special type of synergist that immobilize.
So real quick, here's my hand. So pronation is with your hand down. Whenever you twist your hand downwards like this, palm down, and subnation is when you twist your palm upwards. Anyways.
Mobilizes the bone and muscle origin. Again, the humerus can move. We have a lot of shoulder muscles that move the humerus, but during forearm, a special type of synergist that immobilizes the bone and muscle origin. Again, the humerus can move. We have a lot of shoulder muscles that move the humerus, but during forearm flexion, you don't want the humerus to move. You want it to be the origin. So it would have a fixator to keep that in place. Many of the muscles associated with the scapula are fixators. They help to hold the shoulder joint in place. They help to attach the scapula and the shoulder structures to the axial skeleton. Many of our muscles that maintain upright posture are going to be fixators.
A fixer is a type of, what was it again, everybody? A fixator is a type of, I think it was synergist. I'm going to go with synergist because antagonists fight the agonist. And a prime mover is basically your agonist, I think. You know, I'm not quite sure about the prime mover. I'm still learning. I'm pretty sure a fixator is a synergist. Fixator. I think that's what I just heard her say. Somebody help me out. Shoot me a message. Did anyone hear that? A fixator is a synergist. Is that what I just heard? Maybe I'm tripping, guys. Fixator could be the agonist. I guess we're about to find out.
Now, when we look at muscles, just because you are an agonist doesn't mean that is your only job. Does that mean associated with the scapula are fixators? They help to hold the shoulder joint in place. They help to attach the scapula and the shoulder structures to the axial skeleton.
Muscle origin.
Many of our muscles that maintain upright
cool.
posture
So I got that right.
are going to be fixators.
Sweet. Damn,
now,
son.
when we look at muscles, just because you are an agonist doesn't mean that is your only job. You can be an agonist in one motion. You can be an antagonist in another motion. So just like the biceps brachii is the agonist for forearm flexion, it is the...
Or like Batman is the hero of his city. Like he's the agonist of his city and Joker's the antagonist. But Batman is also the antagonist of Superman. Don't they fight a bunch? Batman and Superman? Batman deems Superman as unstable. So he's always fighting against Superman. And, you know, someone could argue and say that Superman's the agonist or antagonist. You know, it could go both ways. Anyways, let's get back to this.
The antagonist for forearm extension. And of course, you can also be a synergist. Another example in the body would be the deltoid. It is the prime mover of arm abduction when it's all stimulated together. It is an antagonist of the pectoralis major and the latissimus dorsi with our arm adduction. And it is a synergist or a helper of the pectoralis major, which is the prime mover for arm flexion. We will stop there, and the lever system is something that we will cover during lecture.
Oh, I got a 100 side one. Yes. Okay, good. Well, I did good. All right, everybody. That's it for anatomy and physiology. One of my tests for the night. Calling it done. Holla at y'all.